Welcome back to Lawyer's View. I'm your host, Scott Weinberg, and today I have a special guest. We're joined by Chief Judge of the 48th District Court, Judge Diane Agostini. She's a graduate of Wayne State University. She went to DCL Law School, and she used to be an assistant prosecuting attorney in Oakland County. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Scott.
You know, Judge, I've known you for years, but I did not know that you were in charge of the parole appeal division in the prosecutor's office. Tell us about that.
That was a very gratifying position, Scott, for a lot of reasons, but it educated me quite a bit about the prison system, about our Michigan Department of Corrections, and in general, the type of people that are being released or paroled. I would look at every Oakland County prisoner that was being paroled. Obviously, the resources are not there to appeal all cases, nor should all cases be appealed, but in terms of the really horrific crimes, the most violent offenders, we would take a look at their prison file, their misconducts, their rehabilitation efforts, treatment, and make a decision on whether to appeal their parole. That's the decision I would make, and that's what I would do. I would go to the parole board in Lansing with the crime victim. It would be very difficult because now this person who may have been the victim of a murder, the parents or a sibling, would come to Lansing, you know, decades later, and that crime would be as fresh as 5 minutes ago for them.
But was it something where you in the prosecutor's office, you know, I used to be a prosecutor too, did you ever feel, well, they served their time, maybe we should just not object to it?
Sure, and that's what the law says, but the law gives you an ability to file an appeal when the person has not been rehabilitated. So I couldn't focus so much on the crime. The crime was one factor, obviously a horrific crime, but I would have to focus on what happened after the crime to be successful in the appeal. So I would have to look at prison records, misconducts. What was really probably shocking is the level of misconducts the prisoner could have in prison, you know, whether they've got weapons, making their own weapons, using drugs, selling drugs, a variety of things, and then whether they should be paroled or not. So I would be looking at their prison misconducts, their behavior in prison, and what they've done in prison. Our system gives prisoners the ability to rehabilitate themselves by what they do in prison. Some of them take advantage of it, some of them don't. So I would be looking at the ones, obviously, that don't. Rapists, child molesters, what have they done in prison to rehabilitate themselves?
Yeah, I don't know, though. I mean, I've been involved, as you have, for many, many years, and, you know, someone goes to prison, there's so many other factors that go into it of what happened on the outside, and I don't know how they treat them in prison. For instance, mental health issues. Someone goes to prison, they had mental health issues, and I don't think their treatment in prison is great in terms of mental health. Substance abuse counseling, you know, of course they'll have AA and substance abuse treatment providers there. Let's say a drunk driving third offense, and he's going to go to prison. And he's a felon, so he's going to get the treatment before they're going to be releasing him. But I'm not convinced that those programs in prison effectively do that, especially for substance abuse. I think that's been difficult.
Well, and that's what we would take a look at. I can't tell you every program is going to do what it should do, but I want to look at, was the effort made, was something done to at least say the parole board should be granting a parole here. They're very difficult cases to argue. We were successful on a lot, but certainly we lost some as well. But it gave me insight as to individuals that were being released and at what point they were released. As you know, a person could receive a sentence of 10 to 15 years. Are they being released at the 7-year mark, at the 10-year mark, or the 15-year mark? And why is there that disparity? A lot of it has to do with their behavior in prison. So that's another factor I was looking at.
You know, we had a show, we were talking about this craziness that happened in Colorado, and where the prosecutor now, I mean, he was a former prosecutor, you can speak to this too, but we don't have the death penalty in Michigan. But they have to decide on the death penalty if they're going to charge with it. And of course, one of the decisions is, what do the victims want?
Right.
Because if it becomes a death penalty case, gets dragged out for 10 times as much time, perhaps 10 years, before they'll have more of a resolution on what to do with it.
Right. Well, death penalty states those prosecutors have a tremendous decision to make.
But they take into account, and this is what I want to get to on it, is the victim's requests of it. And because you mentioned you dealt with the victims when you were a prosecutor, you dealt with what do the victims really want? What are are they scared for them to come out? Did you ever have it where the victim says, no, I want them out. I don't want to object to it?
I think, I can't remember a situation where a victim was eager for the individual to get out. Most of the cases that I were dealing with were homicide or sexual molestation,
so
child rape.
They want to keep them in.
Well, it was a public safety issue.
Yeah.
And, you know, for a lot, if not all of these victims, the nightmares remain and the trauma remains. And when you're talking about a homicide, as you know, I think time can heal, but for a lot of those victims, it was very painful for them to know that the person was being released. But absolutely, the Crime Victims' Rights Act gives victims a voice, as you know, and they have a right to be involved in parole hearings. But some victims are of the position that they want this to be over and they don't want to participate. So I would see both sides, and sometimes the prosecutor makes a decision without the victim.
Well, now you of course are the chief judge here in 48th District Court. You've been for many years, and you deal with people that are victims of crimes all the time. But you know, we were talking about before, with domestic violence cases, you can have a complainant or victim of a case, and as you see it, I'm sure you see it every day, they might have called the police, something might have happened with it, but now they don't want to go forward with the case. What do you do as a judge? How do you involve yourself in the process if someone doesn't want to go forward with the case?
Well, the prosecutor has the jurisdiction there on whether they're going to proceed with the case. But I had a case actually this week that was similar to that. The defendant went ahead and pled guilty. When it came time for sentencing, the victim of the domestic violence wrote me a very long letter wanting me to know her wishes, and she was adamant about not wanting to see her ex-husband go to jail. The case had a lot of issues, and I looked at that letter quite heavily in making a decision. She has a right to make a statement. Now, when I make my decision for sentencing, I'm going to look at what the defendant has to say, his or her lawyer, what the victim has to say, what the prosecutor has to say. Ultimately, though, I'm also looking at what the law's parameters are and making a decision which I hope addresses safety issues as well as the rehabilitation of the individual. You're going to try your best. When victims don't want to proceed, as you know, the prosecutor can still proceed without the victim testifying, obviously.
Those are tough cases.
Very tough cases, very tough cases. And it's happened a few times. But it depends on the case, I think.
Right. When you have something like that, too, where you have, let's say, a defense attorney coming in, you have us arguing, saying they don't want to go forward with it. You have a prosecutor saying that they don't want to go forward. You mentioned the Crimes Victims' Rights Act, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding, the reason why they really want to hold complainants in this case more accountable is because they want a public policy. That's a public policy of saying we want to make them more comfortable in bringing the actions, and we don't want undue influence by the offender or by anybody, a family member, to try and get them to drop the case, to try and get them not to come. And that really is, I was a prosecutor too, one of the reasons why we had that kind of policy. As a defense attorney, it's of course a completely different role, where our job is to protect the rights of the offender. But do you find that is the public policy behind it?
I do, and I had one case where a victim didn't want to go forward, and when I looked at the individual's records, there were 2 to 3 other domestic violence cases that were dismissed. So you start to have concerns, whether there is any influence there on getting these cases dismissed. Ultimately, the victim has a lot of say in the courtroom, but the prosecutor is going to be looking at those issues on whether they want to proceed. Obviously, for a judge, I'm not making that decision. The prosecutor will decide, are they going to hold a trial against the victim's wishes? And sometimes they do.
What role do you think substance abuse plays with domestic violence?
Well, I think substance abuse plays a role in quite a lot of categories of crime, domestic violence being one of them. I see alcohol playing a larger role in domestic violence. I see drugs, whether it's heroin, cocaine, and other drugs playing
Especially
a role.
this new synthetic marijuana.
Sure, absolutely. I see that playing a role in a lot of the theft crimes that I see, whether it's credit card fraud, theft of jewelry from homes. That's what I've been seeing in the last several months, especially, is theft crimes and the person feeding their drug habit.
One of the things that I see in court is when judges treat the offenders differently court to court. And I appreciate you coming here because I want to get a feel for, we'll have one court treated very, very harshly. Let's just take something as like a domestic violence. They'll treat it like it's a substance abuse crime. Alcohol counseling and drug offender counseling, domestic violence counseling, treat it like they need mental health and substance abuse counseling. And you'll have another court, they won't do that, but they'll put the offender in jail. You can't get the same kind of, there's such disparity between court to court. And I want you to talk about that. What do you think about that?
Well, I hear that from attorneys, you did this, somebody else would have done this. I can't answer to what somebody else has done or would do. I can only, answer to what I am going to do and what I'm responsible for, and I can tell you the things that I look at. We're duty bound by the law, and the way I look at my job is I have a responsibility to the community. One of the responsibilities is public safety. A judge does affect public safety by the decisions that they make. I believe in accountability. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone should go to jail. Absolutely not. But I think when you commit a crime, you should be held accountable. That could mean community service. That could mean a fine. That could be drug treatment. As you know, I impose quite a bit of treatment and counseling for persons that merit that in their lives. Not everybody needs treatment, but a lot of people do, based on what we're seeing with drug crimes and alcohol-related crimes.
Especially, and we were talking before, and with the producer about the issues of kids. And of course, I know you have your own show with the kids too. And do you see that, because I know you have the kids in court, the court in school program.
Right.
And we recently had a case together that really was a great success story.
Huge success. I think about him a lot.
And it changed this young man's life. It really did. But there was a lot of counseling with that. There was a year of, he probably thought, what happened? How did I get involved with this? And because we both know it was an MIP. And it was a lot of counseling, and it changed his life. It really did.
Scott, I've seen young people. I think we need to question why teenagers and young people are looking to these substances that impact their lives. That's one issue on why they're going there. But once they're there, then that's a whole nother equation, and I see those individuals in court. I'm trying to be proactive. I take the court to schools. I have field trips where the kids come to schools. I want to educate kids at a young age, and my target group is 4th grade. That's my order in the court program.
Young.
Well, it's young, but you know what? I talk to the kids in a really simple way that drugs are evil. And that's the way I start the conversation. I give them a certificate on respecting the law. Now, when we talk about drugs that help you feel better, when you're sick and you have a high fever, and other types of drugs that can really change your life. And it's a very simple conversation, but I see those same kids later on at 8th grade, 9th grade, and 10th grade, and I remind them about the conversation we have. Now it's a more serious conversation. Now they're seeing people in court who are committing crimes to feed their drug habit, who are, committing drunk drivings and putting other people in danger. So it's a different conversation then, but it's the education process. I want to get to these kids well before they come to court. Once they come to court, though, you and I both know some of these kids have been using substances for a long time and are addicted. And
now, of course, the medicines, and that's a whole different conversation about it, but that is really one of the major drugs they're using, is going into the parents' medicine cabinet and using the medicines that had no business being used by teens. But that's for a different conversation. I really want to thank you for coming on, and I know that, of course, you're running for office, so that everybody can see you and they can watch and judge you accordingly with it. But thank you for doing what you did for the kids. I appreciate
Thank you so much, Scott. It's a pleasure to be here.
If you are struggling to pay energy bills, always contact your utility provider first for shut-off prevention or payment plans. For other available energy, weatherization, and assistance programs, call 211 or the Michigan Public Service Commission at 1-800-292-9555. You can also visit their website at michigan.gov/MPSC for more information. A public service message from the Michigan Public Service Commission.
Welcome back. Why is it that when we open up our paper, all we do is read about assaults, what store got robbed, what's going on with our kids with new drugs? What is going on with crime here in Oakland County? Are crime statistics up, or are we actually trying to avoid going and dealing with these criminals? Today, what we have is a real treat. We have Oakland County Sheriff Michael Bouchard. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You know, Sheriff, I'm a criminal lawyer and I see crime all the time. And when you have the economy that's been struggling, and it seems like it's coming back, but all we do is read in the paper about still assaults. We hear about domestic violences. We hear about things that seem that they should be perhaps going down as the economy is getting better. What's going on?
In many respects, the economy is getting better, but there's still a lot of people that are left behind, and it's not getting better for them. A lot of people are working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, so there's a lot of stress, almost a tension level out there that I see and I feel on a palpable basis. So there seems to be a lot quicker fuse in many of the situations, the assault situations, some of the road rage. And I don't know because if it's all the stress or society because of all the things you're bombarded with. There's no quiet time anymore. If you're on vacation, you're still texting and emailing, and there's no time to really, I don't know, but there seems to be a quicker kind of fuse on so many different situations, as you mentioned, the assault thing.
I do see, though, even going in 50th District Court, because they obviously stopped the police department there, and you guys have had to pick it up, there does seem to be a smaller docket. That definitely seems to be less, I don't know about crime going on in Pontiac, but definitely the courts don't have as many people going through it.
Well, actually, when we took over in Pontiac, arrests went up 400%. So,
Wow.
There were a lot of things. There were some great men and women in Pontiac before we took over, but they were running in a system that just didn't allow them to succeed. They had gone from 220 officers down to 50, so they literally couldn't even respond to all the calls. When we took over, the response time to 911 calls was 70 minutes. So we brought the response time down for priority calls and calls in general quite a bit. If priority calls are 6 minutes or so. Arrests are up 400%. I think there's a big difference in terms of the safety and the perception of safety in Pontiac.
Well, 70 minutes down to 6 minutes, that's incredible. But you mentioned before about, and we're talking about the economy and the stress level. I do see, though, that when the substance abuse goes up, when people are drinking more, and definitely when there's more stress at home, there is more substance abuse going on. I see more domestic violence, that is for sure. I think that is a direct relation to domestic violence.
I agree. I think we see more domestic violence. We see more, tragically, suicides. We have a thing called the pass-along. It's major incidents that happen throughout the county every day, and I read it usually about 6 a.m. or so. Suicides are on there almost every day, and domestic violence is on there almost every day. In terms of somebody actually getting hurt, hit, stabbed. So, yeah, no question, it very much seems to be an everyday occurrence. To me, that's very much on the rise. The other thing that's going on, too, a lot of these statistics, it's really hard to quantify because, for example, in Pontiac, they had 220 officers. When we got there, they had 50. They would only respond to, let's just throw out a number. I don't know how it's hard to quantify. Let's say 1 in 4 crimes that occurred, lots of times people weren't calling or the car wouldn't get sent because they didn't have a car. So only a quarter of the crimes actually that were occurring were reported. Looks like crime's going down because that's the reported statistics. Because they had such fewer officers to respond, Michigan has 3,000 fewer police officers in the last decade. So everybody's got less police officers. So I think a lot of the falling crime can be attributed to less officers taking reports. So it's kind of
just from budget cuts, from being able to not afford the officers?
Right. I'm down 175 positions myself. So every agency's been affected by budgets in a dramatic way. And so I think that in part affects the crime statistics. So it's a little bit, I think, misleading to look at some of the graphs saying, boy, crime continues to fall. It might be, but it might also have a correlation to there's a whole lot less people taking reports, and therefore they're not seeing actually being recorded. And as you know, in defense attorney, oftentimes rape victims never report a crime. Well, now it's kind of spread across the continuum. A lot of people aren't calling in because it may take too long to get a car, depending on the community and how many officers they still have on the job.
But when you look at the budget and the issues that obviously you have and Oakland County has in terms of also keeping its jails, and there's so much money we spent on incarceration and our prison system, it's amazing, though, and I see this in court all the time, where so many of our crimes can be dealt with through substance abuse treatment. Right. And I would want, I'd like to get your opinion on it, sure, more money spent on that type of either mental health treatment and substance abuse treatment, as opposed to simply incarcerating someone.
Oh, I'm in agreement. In fact, you know, I've been in law enforcement a long time, and in the middle of those blocks of a couple decades here and over a decade there, I was a state senator, and I was one of the few that voted against closing Clinton Valley and a lot of the facilities, Lafayette, for mental health purposes, because I believe that's an important aspect of how we deal with a lot of societal issues, is to have that in a treatment realm. So now a lot of those folks have been shifted to incarceration. You know, on any given day, I may have 13% of my population on psychotropic meds. You know, I'm not a mental health institution, but if I've got 15% of my population on psychological medications, in many respects I am. So we actually created a pilot program with Common Ground and Easter Seals and Community Mental Health, and we trained up all the police departments in the county and encouraged them to take a nonviolent offender and divert them away from the criminal justice offender to mental health treatment in conjunction with those partners. So we've been doing that in Oakland County, try to get those folks out of the jail and into treatment. We also have been pushing real hard on a lot of the judges to take substance abuse and other kinds of things and look for alternatives, whether it's treatment, whether it's drug courts, but also tethering. You know, we have technology that's come leap years. We can put a tether on an offender, and it can even test their blood alcohol. We know where they are. We know if they're drinking. I'd much rather put that kind of person, you know, back in their home and make them go to and from work, and it monitors if they're doing it, monitors if they have a drink, and if they violate it, then put them in jail.
It's so true. There's so many alternative sentencing options than just incarcerating someone, and especially like a scram tether, and really the alcohol offenses too, as opposed to just sticking them in jail. Right. There was a new law that just came out, and I know that you were involved with it and talking about it too, with outlawing the synthetic marijuana and K2. And one, I wanted to get your feeling. Do you like the law? Do you think it's a good law?
Excuse me. Yes, I do. And I think it's a misnomer that it's synthetic marijuana, because most of the symptoms is not at all like marijuana. Marijuana typically is what the street would call a downer, kind of a relaxant, kind of a mellow kind of situation, where the synthetic drugs are more hallucinogenic and more of an upper. And you see some very bad reactions and symptoms from it. Very dangerous. You know, there's absolutely no interaction in terms of FDA or anybody having any idea what's in it or what the effect it will be on a person's body. And so the proliferation of it has been huge. So we're real glad that it's going to be banned effective July 1st. And more importantly, because it was already banned in the past, but what happens is these offshore manufacturers pass. Once they see it was passed in a law to ban it, then they tweak a couple of the components. So if 1, 2, 3, and 4 were illegal, now they make it 5, 6, 7, and 8 and put it back in the market.
I mean, I don't have any misnomers about it. There's definitely going to go underground. There are definitely going to be people that are going to sell it just like any other controlled substance. And the thing that I really was active about and what really got me into it was having a 12 or 13-year-old be able to go to the local gas station and be able to buy it when there's no other purpose for that at all. Right. And that's really what got me involved with it, that's for sure.
I agree, and that's what we were seeing. We were seeing young teenagers experimenting with it, and worse, teenagers that had already gotten into court for maybe marijuana or other substance abuse, and they were trying to steer them into treatment and get them away from substance abuse. And they knew and realized that these things weren't tripping drug tests.
Right.
So they were going to buy this, realizing they could still scam the drug test.
Right. But now the courts, I think, are much more active, and they're going to be much more active in testing for it. And what that'll also do is it'll bring the price down for those tests, because the price actually were a little expensive on it. I want to get to, we had a couple web questions for you, and it really has to do with more of a drinking issue in teenagers. You know, we live in the Lakes area here, and one of the questions from a Cass Lake resident, why do some of the lakes have deputies on them, yet kids are partying and drinking and acting wild on the other lakes without police? What is the story with policing the lakes?
Well, we only get about a quarter of what we actually spend, or got about a quarter of what we actually spend on marine patrol from the state. The state takes boat registration fees and then distributes it around the state. Oakland County has 450 navigable lakes, so we actually had the biggest marine division, but it was costing us a dramatic amount of money that we were unreimbursed for from the state. And so when my budgets were cut $14, $15, $16 million, you know, everything got affected, including marine patrol. So what happened was a lot of the lakes that used to have a full-time boat, just out of our general fund and out of our budget, we could no longer afford to do. So what a lot of lakes did is they said, we want to hire a deputy to have full-time on the lake.
So they pay them separately for that?
So like the homeowners association on the lake kicks in and they buy a deputy, and what we would do is we work with the homeowners association and say, what's the worst hours for problems, for parties, for drunken behavior, for speeding or dangerous behavior, you know, and then we'd make sure that the deputy gets scheduled in those hours to suit their needs, and that local association funds it. Now, we still have marine deputies, but they're jumping around, you know, 450 lakes. Obviously, they're not going to be on the lake all the time. And so that's where some lakes have a lot more presence because they pay for it.
You know, in going through the courts, it really is not common for people to get drunk boating tickets. I mean, I've seen it, but it's not as common as driving around and stopping someone for drunk driving. And yet there really is a lot of drunk boating.
Right, no question. It's not as common because, you know, there are so many lakes and there's only so many deputies. But we used to have more when we had more deputies on the lakes. I mean, it's sometimes on busy days we may have 25 to 30 boats out. You know, in the old budget days, we just simply don't have that ability anymore. So, you know, you may have 5 to 15 boats on a really busy day when all the lakes that are paying for it have people out plus a few extra. So we don't have nearly the same amount of eyes and ears. But if there's a problem going on, we always have a jump boat and a response boat. So if there's an issue on a weekend, typically is when they're happening, you know, please make sure that we get a call, and if we've got a boat available, we'll try to shoot one over if it's some issue that's ongoing.
Well, I will do that when I'm on the lake next, that's for sure. Well, thank you for coming to the show. We appreciate it.
Sure.
Well, hopefully you'll come back and we'll see you again.
Sounds
Thanks
good.
for coming and welcome, and we'll see you next time on Lawyer's View.